free to proceed. And
Yes, well, I'm hoping Mr. Balsanic will be with us shortly. So we may as well call to order since we do have a quorum. And the first thing up, unless there's anything else we need to address right away, John. Start there.
Yeah, as you were saying that, Madam President, I just got a text from Joe to send him over the Zoom link. Dan, would you be able to do that quick? Thanks. So we'll get Joe on here in a minute. As far as the agenda goes, there's only one change that I have to the agenda, and that would be item number B, which is the discussion of the offer to purchase property at 222 Ramsey Street. We're going to move that from the agenda tonight. There's some issues that we need to look at about the sale of property to a HEDRA commissioner that we want to take some more time to resolve prior to any action by the board. So we would ask for that to move tonight. Other than that, the agenda would stand as presented.
And maybe we can just, if you want to say a few things about Rusty, just to kick off the meeting.
I certainly can. I mean, I think we talked a little bit about that as we were sitting here to begin the meeting. As I think most people know, Rusty Fifield, our economic development coordinator, is leaving us, retiring tomorrow. Tomorrow was his last day. And Rusty's been with us on an official capacity as an economic development coordinator for a year and a half, but has been involved with cities like Hastings for nearly 40 years. We were very fortunate to find someone of Rusty's caliber to come into this position. Someone not only who is knowledgeable on all things finance and TIF and economic development related, but also has tremendous contacts and has also been a tremendous mentor to me as I learned as much as I could from him during the time period he has been here. With Rusty's journey, it's been interesting. He started out as a planner and in fact did a couple of early plans for Hastings. He did one, I believe, in the 1880s. I think that was our first downtown plan. And then we also have one he did in 2002, our Heart of Hastings plan, which in my tenure of working in planning and development is the most useful plan that I've ever had. And I think the testament to that is how it's still being used and referred today, nearly 20 years after the fact. You know, the whole riverfront renaissance that we did in the downtown area really was roadmapped through this downtown Heart of Hastings plan. And so I want to thank Rusty for his years of dedication, not only to Hastings, but to many other cities throughout the state, and wish him well in his retirement.
Bravo, Rusty.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Kind words. I appreciate the opportunity to have this position. I expected to hold on to it longer, but the coronavirus helped me decide that it was now the time to retire. I will miss working with all of you, but there's some really exciting things that I hope will attract a really good replacement for me. And it's been fun. And now I can go from an employee of the city of Hastings to one of the growing mass of visitors that will be coming to Hastings because of all the things that are here. So it's not goodbye. It's just see you later. I still have a growler to take back to the spiral.
Wonderful. Okay, and I see that Mr. Balsanic is here with us. Can you hear us okay? Just wave. Thank you. Wonderful. Okay, we are called to order, and we'll just begin by taking a vote on the minutes. So if everyone's had an opportunity to review that, we'll stand for a motion to approve the minutes from last month, June 11th.
I'll move to approve.
Thank you. All those in favor will do roll call. Mr. Sinclair. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I saw a second and I forgot to identify that. Mr. Vaughn. Thank you. Mr. Sinclair. We're voting to approve the minutes from last month. Maybe he's frozen. Looks like he might be. Mr. Vaughn.
Yes.
Ms. Fox.
Yes.
Mr. Goldlersch.
Yes.
And I will say yes as well. Mr. Balsanic.
Yes.
Okay. And we are waiting for And to come back, Mr. Piney.
Yes.
Okay, and Scott is back with us again, and approval on the minutes.
I'm back. I don't know where I went, but I'm back.
You appeared to be frozen for a moment there. Yes on the minutes or no
Yes.
on the minutes for additions?
Approval of
Okay.
minutes is the yes.
Minutes are approved. And then we will go on to a review of the bills for this month.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Just two bills we had within your packet. One is our HEART grant expenditures, which were used, of course, to help COVID relief for many businesses in the downtown. That's about $170,000 total, and then some legal bills. And so I can stand for any questions on the bills.
And I just had one, John. Was this published anywhere? Like, I don't know that there's like a news section of our website or maybe for the city, but this to show where the funds went. And I don't know that the businesses necessarily want it known either, but just how much was expended and how we're helping the city, just in terms of keeping up with one of our strategic goals in communication with our citizens of the city and the surrounding area, what we've helped accomplish.
Sure. Yes, we didn't get into the specific allocations with businesses, but we did push out that we did have this funding available, and we did bring it out to, I forgot the total number of businesses altogether, but we did have something not like that out right after the allocation.
And anyone who's reviewing tonight, are they able to find it somewhere if they haven't seen it yet?
Yeah, I mean, the specific allocations, I don't think we publicly posted that, but we certainly have a list of that.
All right. Any discussion or questions for Mr. Hinsman on the bills this evening as presented?
Madam President, I'll move to accept.
Okay, is there a second on this motion to accept the bills as stated? Mr. Globush has indicated a second on that. We're going to take a roll call. I will say aye in approval, and Mr. Vaughn?
Aye.
Mr. Globush?
Aye.
Ms. Fox?
Aye.
Mr. Balsanic?
Aye.
Mr. Sinclair?
Aye.
Mr. Piney?
Aye.
Thank you. Bills are approved. And next large item is the section on business, and we will review development options for Block 1.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll begin the conversation tonight with a little bit of an introduction of what we hope to accomplish. As you know, we have 1.5 acres on Block 1. Block 1 is that area north of Art Space, between Art Space and the Mississippi River. We've held that property for some time, have been looking at development at it for probably over 20 years. We have two proposals of development options for that property. One we heard last week, which was from Spades SBC. Spades is a startup company that is looking to acquire the property and to bring in an office building that would house 200 people. So we did hear the presentation last week on Spades, learned a little bit about their business and time frame of development. With that meeting, we also had knowledge that we had another seeker of the property as well, Mint Development. So we were able to, I sent out, I think, the information from Mint Development's proposal right around the meeting time. And then we look to have more information from Mint Development tonight. And so we'll be turning it over here in a minute or two to Rob Barse of Mint Development. In the meantime, at the meeting last time, you were directed staff to put together a purchase and development agreement with the understanding that this provides a mechanism for us to review a development option with Spades or a development option with Mint tonight, because Mint has already submitted a letter of intent and some information about their terms for development of that. And so what I'd like to do tonight is a couple of things. One, turn it over shortly here to Rob Barse of Mint Development to talk a little bit about what his vision would be for the site. After that, I'll turn it over to Rusty Fifield to review some of the Spades SBC development agreement, the draft development agreement that's been put together since the last meeting. And then after that, turn it over to the HEDRA commissioners for a discussion of options. Because ultimately what we're seeking is development of the property. And for either party to move forward, they would prefer to have some exclusive rights on the property. With both of those agreements, I believe it would be 1 year that they would be looking for exclusivity, which would provide them some surety that they could move forward on the property without it being sold to another party. And so that's ultimately what we're looking for direction on tonight from the board. But before we do that, let's hear a little bit from Mr. Barris. I'm going to bring him into the meeting right now so that he should be here. And I think I saw him a minute. Maybe I kicked him out. Nope, he came back again. Good. So Rob, let me know when you can hear me here.
Hey, John. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Did you have anything that you wanted to share via PowerPoint tonight?
I do have a presentation put together via PowerPoint if I can share screen with you on that.
I think I just provided you the permission. So if do you see that option available?
Yeah, looks like I can here. Give me one second. Oh, it only gives me drives that I can share actually. A second here. Let me see if it gives me another option. Looks like I only get share content options. I am on an iPad, so it gives me photos, iDrive, Dropbox. So what I could do, John, is if necessary, I could send you the proposal if you're able to pull it up.
Yep, I can do it that way.
Okay, give me 1 second here.
Sure, not a problem at all. So yeah, as Rob goes through the work on that one here, yeah, within the packet itself, we had Rob's information on that and his development proposal. He'll be sharing that with us here in a moment as well. And so we'll be able to find out a little more detail on that. So I'll wait for Rob's information to come forward here. And then we'll be able to move forward on that.
Sorry, 1 second here, John.
No worries.
John, what's the?
Yeah, worry about Rob is, we may have a limitation on size.
Oh, I sent you a link, so.
Oh, link, that should be work
Yep,
good.
so it'll come into a Dropbox link.
Okay, great. So then I'll be able to pull that up here in a moment here once I get that thing through. Okay,
Perfect.
got that link here. So I will open this thing up and be with this thing in just a moment. Okay, so let me just see. I've got it here. So can I just, if I can just move back and forth with this. Whoops, that's zooming. Okay.
There should be a slideshow tab where you can start the slideshow.
Okay. All right. Let me just do this here. I'm going to put this over to here. There we go. That's much better. I will share this here in just a moment and we can get started here. This would be there. And okay. Looks like everything should be up here now. You see everything, Rob?
Yep, that'll work.
Okay, let me go back one. I'm one slide ahead.
No problem.
There we go.
All right. You can go ahead and go to that second slide.
Okay.
Evening, commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you here this evening and to propose an alternative development plan for the Block 1 site. For those of you that I don't know personally, I started Mint Development Company last May in 2019. And fortunate to say that I feel that I'm thriving in these unprecedented times. I have a 13-year proven track record and background in commercial real estate development and project advisory services. You can go ahead to the next slide, please, John. So when I set out to start Mint Development Company, my core goal was to focus on housing projects. And that focus was to shift people's thinking about rental norms and to be 100% committed to elevating the guest and resident experience. by intertwining spaces you never want to leave with natural landscapes that call your name. We're creating boutique rental properties of architectural significance that everyone wants to visit or call home. And, this is an important piece because we view, how I view the developments is that connection between internal and external spaces. So natural draw to this site because of that. You can go ahead, John, on the next slide. So briefly, and I say it briefly, I did a time test on this presentation. It's too long, so I'll try to cruise through this a little swiftly here, but I did want to touch on just a track record of performance. So if you're familiar with the Aspen Dental site, this was a project that I developed on behalf of McShane Development. It was a 3,500 square foot med office building that we completed in 2018, and that was land acquired from the city at a fair market value. And the project also included approximately 500 feet of public utilities that were constructed. And so currently the property tax value on that project is contributing to over 26,000 annually and created 10 to 15 jobs with Aspen Dental for that project. The next slide here is a conceptual plan of our senior housing project in town that we're working on. Earlier this spring, we received approval for a comp plan amendment and rezoning that was required. We're currently heavy in civil engineering and architectural design. Our goal is to be back in front of the city for plating and site plan approval later this fall with an anticipated construction start date of next spring. And so the last two bullets that I want to highlight on, because I know there's a lot of discussion about job creation and things like that. And so a project of this magnitude that we're bringing forward, we're estimating that the projected annual property taxes will be about $125,000. That's based on other local comps and similar projects already on the tax roll. And what we're projecting at this time is that we'd have 30 full-time equivalents at the site. And another 156 indirect jobs, and that's your temporary jobs through construction, architectural engineering teams, and your FF&E teams. The last one here that I thought was important to highlight. So right as COVID set in, I was engaged by a Wisconsin-based nonprofit developer. It was literally in the middle of March. They provide a low-income affordable product that requires a tax dollar, low-income tax credits along with it. So we were in the middle of the stay-at-home order going in place, both in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And within 90 days, I was able to bring a site forward that we executed a PSA on. And it's going to be a transit-oriented development along a future bus rapid transit line that we're working on. So, again, I just wanted to highlight things that I'm doing in the marketplace, a proven track record of similar type assets, that we're continuing to focus on. Next slide, please. So specific to the Block 1 site, so why is housing right for this site? I think there's a multitude of things. When I look at city goals, I see alignment with the 2040 comp plan. It's currently guided as a mixed-use product or a property. It's zoned and designated as a downtown core with focus on commercial on the main floor with residential above and carve-outs and opportunities for residential on the main level. And just as recent of January of this year, this is a quote from the memo, that local housing needs are one of the key issues in the strategic plan and affirmed as a focus for 2020. So more of a subjective viewpoint and kind of where I think the market's headed and why this is a great site for housing. We're currently have been in a time where empty nesters and millennials were flocking to urban settings within the Twin Cities, really focused on finding those work, play, live environments. Hastings was kind of at a disadvantage. According to HEDRA's strategic plan, a status summary in September, you'd identified a primary objective was to dispel the proximity myth. So I think the unique thing right now that we're moving into is I view that somewhat as an advantage now, where maybe it's been a challenge for the community in the past. We come out of a post-COVID setting, and I think people are going to reevaluate their housing options, what's important from safety and desires and where they want to be and how many people they want to be around. We're seeing different shifts in other assets like our senior housing project. Originally, we were going to offer independent living, assisted living, and memory care. The independent living component is a little more problematic now based on what happened when those facilities got locked down and people weren't able to move as freely when they were in independent living settings. So there's a lot of shifts taking place in the market. And I think this is one that would be an advantage for Hastings and specifically the site. As your report states, the property is located downtown on the river. I guess I'm not sure on this last one in the national park, but it's within walking distances from the restaurants and lodging, and that no other location in town has these characteristics. And I think that's spot on. I mean, these are the things that excite us about the site, and the very reason why we think this would be a great housing site. This was an excerpt I took out of a recent article. I thought it was timely. It's a survey that covered a small population, but it says that 27% of adults in the U.S. are considering moving home because of COVID crisis, and that 43% of millennials within that group are considering a move and likely to suburban or rural towns. And again, I think those are just advantageous for Hastings and what the downtown core offers. So to play devil's advocate, knowing that there's competing proposal out there in a different asset class, I think it's important to think about and ask yourself, what's the future for office? When I look at it from a macroeconomic perspective, this is a big question mark. Post-COVID, what's going to happen to larger office buildings? Currently, if people can work from home, they've been required to do so for nearly 120 days. In real time, we're establishing new norms related to things like how people function in the office environment. And it's important to think about what that's going to look like in the future. In quotations here, I mean, I think a prime example is we've got an office headquarter that used to house Anytime Fitness. I've been in town for 5 years, and that's been sitting vacant and available that entire time. It's priced at a point that you could never touch from a replacement standpoint. So I think it's, telling of where the marketplace already was, let alone where we're going to head. Again, another excerpt, same article, as I previously referenced. It's, a quote from the owner of Twitter and Square, stating that, their employees can work from home forever, and other, big brands, Google, Facebook, are giving people to the end of the year. Again, there's just a lot of uncertainty in this asset class, probably one at the forefront of COVID and, what's the future. So again, I think those are just important things that I wanted to put in front of the board to be thinking about. Next slide, please. So specifically with respect to the Block 1 site, this snapshot here is a combination of a GIS, Dakota County GIS takeoff that shows the 100-year and 500-year floodplain. I overlaid that and sketched over the top with some software, pulling an old historic plat of where we're anticipating the various utility and drainage easements. So the one, clearly that's out there is the 50-foot easement that bifurcates the property. And there's actually 2 easements there. There's the overhead transmission lines, and then I believe there's a second one for center point for underground utilities. And then there's another drainage and utility easement that runs up the east side of the parcel, and it ranges in size, but at the smallest is about 40 feet. In addition to that, we all know that bedrock is going to be in play on the site based on the art space project and just the general geographical makeup of the area, but that'll be a hindrance. There's also additional unknown items that are out there. There's the existing structure on site. Don't know if that's a city building or something other. I also question whether there's any existing parking easements that exist. For the railway, they already park over there. I don't know if that's because of convenience or if there's legal rights that they have to be able to access that. But those are, all important things to flush out and potential restrictions on the site. So this next slide regarding the proposed development that I'm here to talk about. This is very high level. That's why it's a gray box building. It's more of a site overlay and massing study that we conducted with a civil engineer to take in the known restrictions. Our assumption at this time, based on conversations with Excel, is that it's likely they will allow parking under their overhead easement, but not guaranteed at this time. They had to do further investigation. Additionally, they have confirmed in earlier conversations, those are not cheap to move. They run at a price of, their quote to me on the phone was $750,000 a pole. So you're going to move two at minimum to change anything on the site. So you're $1.5 million in to move the transmission line. So this really helped us get a feel for the magnitude of the project that could be accomplished on the site. And if you go to the next slide, John, this is an aerial of that same graphic, but kind of just shows you how it takes up the site. So this plan shows 32 parking stalls, which in itself is another potential limiting factor, unless the city was willing to consider variances on that based on the Urban Land Institute parking calculation that you use. Having 32 stalls, if that is indeed the cap, and there's no underground parking that can be achieved, that bookends a potential development to about 20 units. So again, this helped us just really get a feel for like, what can you achieve? How do we work within the restrictions? What can be done? When you look at developable area, one of the inherent challenges is the northern parcel that has a little pie-shaped carve out that is there. It's really difficult probably for most developments to be able to utilize that. Our vision for this complex would be a blend of short-term and traditional rentals. So, your annual leases, and maybe a handful of the units would be more of your Airbnb short-term rentals. And so the thing I love about that wedge that gets created on the north side is our ability to create an amenity-driven community. So I look back on the last time I lived in a multifamily complex prior to coming to Hastings. We were in Apple Valley, and it was a small complex with an apartment building and some townhomes, but they had a common building that was fantastic. They had indoor-outdoor gathering spaces, number of outdoor fire pits and fireplaces, pool, hot tub, and really amenities that you can't find currently in the existing stock of multifamily projects in town. And I can't imagine a better place to put that component of a project than up by the path right up along the river. So the housing mix would likely be a blend of studio, 1-bedroom, and 2-bedroom units. Next slide, please, John. So one thing I was a little hesitant to touch on here, because I didn't want to get too far into the weeds, was talking about the team that we're looking to assemble. So we've got a civil engineer that we would bring out of the project that's also working on our senior housing project in town. So there's a lot of continuity with that group. And then I've been in discussion, a number of conversations with the architect that I would love to have on the project. They specialize in unique housing projects and unique outdoor, indoor common areas. So these are two different features that they've had in the news within just the last couple of weeks. They had a special mention in the Urban Land Institute's Open Space Awards. So this was a project that they did in San Diego. They were also featured on the cover of Dwell's website, and I'm assuming in a future printed magazine of a destination rental project that they did in the Pacific Northwest. So very creative group. Promote a lot of unique travel that could come to the site with that short-term component mixed in. So excited for the potential opportunity to be working with a group like that. Next slide, please. So unless there's, John, I can pause here maybe if there's any questions from the commission specifically to the vision of the project. The next slides I have are really more just providing some comments and feedback on things that were raised in the memo and responding to those. I don't know if it will work best to pause for a minute to see if there's any questions, or else I can roll into these quickly as well.
I may turn that over to our president here. Madam President, how would you like to proceed with this?
If there's some brief questions we can cover, indicate just by raising your hand, please, and I can call upon you. I had a couple of initial questions that I think may have been answered. I had written down here. What are some of the main, I guess, inspirations you have that exist already with regard to kind of your vision? If there's something to look towards, like either like in Minneapolis or St. Paul that exist right now that have the mix of commercial on the first level, and if there are any in a similar circumstance, and two, is this going to be kind of high ceiling, very modern, bright and airy type of established housing?
Yeah, definitely appreciate that. So vision is definitely for finding the balance. And I think ArtSpace did it very well, where they blended a modern aesthetics while still recognizing the historic downtown standards that are required, from just massing that they did on the building, window layout. So I would definitely be looking at more of a minimalistic, modern approach to the project, but more of a higher end type product, although smaller square footages for the spaces. So we're really going to focus on, smaller units, but more amenities that are driven for the community. But I would say, as far as a specific example, there's nothing I would directly point you to. We just haven't really gotten that far quite yet with the architect in our conversations.
Would this be a space that would attract younger generations as well? Just kind of what's needed for maybe just working class folk that come into town, non-married, no children. What dynamic we're kind of looking to fill with regard to our strategic plan?
Absolutely. So I think the two demographics that I'd like to appeal towards are finding that blend between your young working professionals, your millennials, and potentially empty nesters. Again, looking back on the community we lived in Apple Valley, we were in that mix. We had, single millennials living there, young families like ours, retirees, and empty nesters. And the thing that we just loved about the communal space is that in the summer, I mean, we never left. We never traveled. We stayed there. It was almost like you're at a resort. Everyone had gatherings going on. I mean, it was just a really dynamic and lively, opportunity for you to enjoy right there. And I mean, I look at it and say, if you put that in the location that we're talking about, I mean, there's not much competition that, can compete with something like that.
Thank you. Okay. Did someone have their hand raised for questions for Mr. Barse? Mr. Sinclair?
Thanks for the presentation. I'm curious, you mentioned the possibility of some mixed use. Can you just talk, what are the trigger points for including or not including a commercial component to go with the housing? What will be the ultimate kind of decision-making aspect of whether or not it's pure housing, or if you add that mixed use component?
I think it would have to be a strong story to support a community like this, where there's, continuity and offering to those residents there, so that it mixes in well. I've contemplated what kind of use could go down there, Is there an office component that's required for the rentals? Is another carve out that could be within it. That's probably more of like a 500 square foot use. But I think if the right use comes along, it'd be considered. Right now, it's a small piece of the pro forma that's more viewed as an optional component. If we can find something that is desirable there.
Okay. So not really a major contingency for the project. It's just a possibility if there's a good synergy with a potential tenant or something there.
Absolutely.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks.
No problem.
Other questions? Yes, Mr. Goldberg.
Hey, Rob, what kind of rents are you looking for 1 or 2 bedroom places?
So we have markers in the pro forma. I would say they're higher than what's taking place in the community right now. I've done homework on what Voyager charges, what Seawart's new project's at. Clearly familiar with where Confluence's 20 apartments would be at from a marker. We'd probably be more in the higher end realm like they will be than your traditional market rate rental. And part of it is just driven by, the absorbing of amenity creation like that. That's got to be spread between residences. So you're ultimately going to be paying more than you would be just for, the unit itself.
As a follow-up, do you have any idea what range it would be?
So I would say, let me see if I can find, I would say we would fall $100 or $200 higher than the competition that's out there. If you give me a second here, I've got the pro forma right here. So 1 bedrooms right now in the marketplace are going for $1,000 to $1,200. So we'd be above that. 2 bedrooms are $1,400 to $1,500. So we'd step up about $200 over each of those.
Thank you. Other commissioners with questions at this stage? And I know I apologize. I may be getting us into the weeds a little bit too with my questions, but just curious.
No, great questions.
Anyone else before we let Mr. Burse exit? Okay, well, seeing none, I'll just thank you and I'll hand it over to Mr. Hinsman with any additional comments on this.
Okay, thank you, Madam President. I'm not sure, Rob, there was a few more slides of your proposal. Was there more that you wanted to add at this point?
If I could, I would appreciate the opportunity to just kind of address some of the items in the report. Those kind of just dealt with more of the specifics, if that's all right with the commission.
Okay, well, I'll put back up the screen again here. Hold on.
Okay.
Let's see.
Perfect. So I'll again try to fly through these quickly. And so the next few slides just kind of follow along with the memo and a few of the sections in here and just have some feedback and thoughts that I'd like to offer. So as far as the requested actions that were outlined, there's 3 actions outlined. And from my perspective, I would just throw out there that I feel maybe there's a 4th that the board can consider. You could consider proceeding with the obligations outlined in Spade's preliminary development agreement, as far as HEDRA's obligations, and the key ones being, getting title work done so you can do an ALTA survey, and then a summary of the regulations. Most of those I do know, but it would be helpful to, understand that, and then those could be shared with the 2 prospective parties. Concepts could be, refined further and validated. It may tell us a lot of information, whether it's positive or negative, but that is something, that could be considered, that I would propose. Next slide, please, John. Wanted to touch on the land valuation. It was, Candidly, I would say I do feel a bit at a disadvantage. I'm a bit disappointed in the process following my LOI submitted in June. Really, there was no follow up on it. I proactively sought it 2 or 3 different times. So some of the information that was in this report was new information for me. So one being the base price that was out there for panache and is being considered for spades. So I just wanted to talk about land valuation from a developer's perspective, just to give you insight on how we came to our number. Again, based on my earlier analysis, of the 1.5 acres, I would argue that really only 50% of the site has developable or buildable area. So if you did use that calc, I would argue that the value is maybe closer to 230, 235. When we're looking at multifamily sites, we typically underwrite from a perspective of a unit cost versus a square foot. Maybe more common in commercial and retail. For us, multifamily, we look at it as a unit cost that we can underwrite into the projects. So again, I would just share that I, currently have 2 projects under contract, both for housing sites, very similar unit pricing as proposed in the LOI. When we take that 470 and backed it into a unit price, depending on if you were at the low end of the 20 units on the site or 30, it's 2 to 3 times higher than what's standard in the market. So the project just can't move forward at a valuation like.
Shoot. Yeah, it looks like we just lost Rob here. Nope, he's back.
Sorry about that. Okay, so I just wanted to comment on that, John. You can go to the next one, please. So again, this is the land valuation and the basis for the LOI we submitted. So there was a question raised in the packet as far as following should be incorporated into the LOI. And so number 2 talks a bit about a fixed price. So really the approach I took was maybe the inverse of, taking the 470 and having carve outs to be able to reduce the price. We started with, here's what we know it works, and really it's going to be a derivative of how much density we can pack onto the site. So it moves according to what we're able to build there. So again, projecting that it could get up to 30 units, it's pretty close to that adjusted value of the per square foot price that was on the previous slide. And how this was written, it essentially would establish 105 as the fixed base price that really says, okay, if we can't build anything other than the bare minimum per acre allotment the city requires in this zoning, that's what we can underwrite. Regarding due diligence and developer obligations, so there's John's comment earlier when we first set out. He made the statement that both developers were asking for the same thing, exclusivity for a year, and I would just restate that these are fundamentally different offers. I've provided an LOI to move to a purchase agreement that has due diligence period tied to tactical third party inspections and tasks that have to be done to fully entitle a property to move a project forward. The pre-development agreement is a high level. We get a year to figure things out, and then we're still going to want to move to a purchase agreement. So really, you're looking at least 2 there. And additionally, this list here, the A through G, is what's called out in the pre-development agreement. Again, candidly, I look at it and go, an A&E team has to be selected within a year. We have ours identified. The rail and overhead lines need to get figured out. Neither of those things are changing unless you're going to, be able to figure out how to underwrite $1.5 million into relocating the poles. Detailed total project costs, that's a step we take before we even submit an LOI. So we already have ours done. Sources and uses, same thing. We do those before we get to an LOI. And then timeline, we've provided a schedule that shows you how quick we would anticipate trying to get into the ground. And we've done multiple fit plans and massing studies for a site plan. So again, I feel like these are slightly apples and oranges here, where we're attacking it as a real project that we want to steam forward with, and really the pre-development agreement is an opportunity for someone to kind of figure things out and have a site locked up when it's not really a project tied to it. A couple comments. Again, I'll keep this quick. The analysis section 1B, this quote, the viability of spades cannot be fully dispelled until the company is up and running. I personally question that. I have a hard time following why staff would recommend an exclusive agreement with a startup company that hasn't completed initial fundraising. Has that been validated as far as, does the initial fundraising include capital for the project, or is that a second raise? The ability to raise $10 million for a startup company, I would call a very key indicator to validate their ability to grow to the magnitude that they're putting out there. And I don't know why the city wouldn't want that proof before making a commitment, like giving a party a year exclusivity on site, which it just happened for over 18 months and nothing came out of it. Next slide, please. 2B. Again, I'm not going to read through all these, but these were the merits. There's a statement that there's no secondary benefit to a housing project that we're proposing, but there's a number of merits behind the spades proposal. And I guess my comment here is they're all hypothetical, unknown outcomes, and completely subjective. And I don't want to, I'm not here, I want to be presenting the merits of what we can do in a project, but it's hard to sit back and see that this could get tied up when there's not an existing company with maybe 100 employees looking to grow to 200. They're a pure startup, and so all of these are really subjective comments and not factual merits of why that should outweigh a housing proposal. Again, the little risk other than a delay, my response to that would be to look back at the last recession. The 5 years that led up to the 2008 crash in Hastings, there were 1,200 units built. In the 10 years that followed from 2008 to 2017, and this is, stats pulled out of your own reports, a quarter of that was built. We're finally on an uptick again here in the last 2 years, 200 between Voyager and Seawarts and the single family housing developments that have started to pop. A delay for a year or more could impact the viability of both projects on the site. And it seems like there's more than little risk with that decision. So lastly, in closing, I just like to reiterate, the benefits that I think are here with this project. One, maybe first and foremost, the strategy alignment that's been with the strategy that's been in place for HEDRA over the last few years. The track record that I bring to the table, both locally and historically. I believe the project, although clearly no slam dunk with anything on this site, I think it has a higher likelihood of success. It has some immediacy behind the project. And again, this also creates jobs, mainly temporary for construction, but there would be some permanent in addition to the overall just economic impact. That's all I've got for you. I apologize for the lengthy presentation.
Quite all right. And I think it was much needed, though, to ferret out any of the immediate concerns we have and just to get a really good glimpse of what the plan is. So we appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any additional questions on the analysis? Thank you. You answered a lot of questions that I had initially to bring forward.
Here.
Yes, Mr. Sinclair.
No, I thought I saw Mark raise a hand there.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, Mr. Vaughn.
Yep, thanks. I got 3 quick questions, and John and Rusty might help with the first ones here. It says in the memo, the HEDRA price was 470,700 that we had a value on that property. Was that CBRE that was helping us with that number? How did we come up with that number that says HEDRA agreed to? That's the price. HEDRA set the base sale price.
Yeah. Commissioner, I believe that came from what we were marketing when we had CBRE under contract. Rusty, I don't know if you know more than that, but I believe that's where that price came from.
To be honest, I don't know where it came from originally, but it was the price that we were using with Panache. I don't know its origin.
Maybe we could follow up on that if we have, need additional fact basis for that. And again, the per unit analysis versus a square footage analysis being important to kind of go over as well. So.
And one thing I want to follow up with that, the reason I bring that up is I think it's important that HEDRA owns the property and we kind of set the price. We bring somebody in to say, this is the market value of that land. Rob brought some good points here. I mean, he's done a little homework here on those posts being moved. I mean, if we have to bury things and we're talking 1.5 million, but if the land is really worth 470,000, that's roughly a 3-year payback. Maybe we should be getting rid of these lines and making this property more valuable and make it a bigger what it sounds like it's we finally got some demand down there. Should we have a bigger project, a bigger footprint, because there's not much river left and this one has a chance to actually be bigger than what Rob is proposing. And my third point is, and just like what we did with the last one, maybe these developers need to be partnered together. Maybe Rob needs to take the lead and maybe the first floor is for the development company to get going on spades, and the up 2 floors, if we give them enough space, is where the residents go. So that's kind of big picture stuff, Rob. I just wanted to share that maybe we need to do our homework on those burying the wires. At least talk to Excel Energy about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Vaughn, if I could just comment. So the only clarification I give you is the poles, the lines can't be buried. So the high transmission lines that exist that Excel has there, they would have to stay overhead. They could be relocated. You know, it's a financial question, and how many do you really have to move to get them out of the way to have more buildable area?
Fair point. Maybe we should be calling our Excel Energy rep to at least ask the question, saying what is out there for us, and if it's reality check that it's just not a good thing, fair enough. We'll move on to the next point. But I just want to make sure we're asking that question.
Okay, and again, it's my understanding we're not getting into a purchase agreement at this point. We're just doing an exclusivity agreement. Is what's up for action tonight, correct?
Can I piggyback off of Mark's question? Has there, Rob, you might know this, but in terms of that easement, that overhead easement, is there a quick analysis of what that represents as an available square footage or a potential square footage if it were to go away entirely? I mean, to me, that's already a small site. You know, you're talking about just conceptually, it seems like a relatively small increase in available square footage. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that analysis by any stretch, but if there were kind of a metric against, hey, you know, if you're looking at a 3,500 square foot development, you know, that would turn it into a 4,500 square foot development. I don't know if those numbers exist, Rob, but I'm curious if you know what they are.
So based on my research, what I would tell you is their existing condition is not going to change. They'd be financially prohibitive, you know, both from the city's perspective or developer's perspective. And ultimately that 50-foot easement that bifurcates the 2 parcels is actually, it appears it's 2 separate easements. It's one for Excel, and then I believe there's a second one adjacent to it. So they're really each like 25 or 30 feet. And the other one's for underground utilities that exist with like Centerpoint and a few others. So there's multiple parties that are intertwined within those easements.
Perfect. Thanks.
Any additional questions? Thank you, Mr. Bars.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thanks.
No problem.
Thanks, Rob.
Then John, as our meeting administrator, if you have any.
Yeah, I think I'll turn it over to Rusty at this point to give a presentation and some analysis on the purchase and development agreement that was developed upon the direction at the last meeting for the Spade site. So we'll have him up here in just a moment. Turn it over to Rusty.
Well, let me
Thank you.
figure out how to get my, I got to do my screen share. I need screen sharing, John.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did not give you permission to do that. There we go.
John, may I please have screen sharing?
You may have screen sharing permission, Mr.
Thank you.
Field. You should have that now.
Can you all see that then?
Yep.
All right. Come on. Well, if I could figure out how to. All right. So what you have before you for consideration this evening is a preliminary development agreement with Spades, and the purpose of that is to evaluate the feasibility of locating their headquarters building on Block 1. Basically, it'll help to define what that project is. Are there barriers to the project, which we know that there are, and what do we do to mitigate those barriers? And then to create a specific plan to undertake the project that will allow Spades to locate its corporate global offices here in Hastings on the riverfront. There are basically three elements of the purchase, the preliminary development agreement, and I will tell you that it's modeled off of the agreement we had with Panache. The first is the option to purchase Block 1, and then there's a set of obligations that both parties have to perform while the agreement is in existence. So the option to purchase runs through June of 2021. It can be extended by a mutual agreement of the parties. Spades, however, can terminate it early if it's determined that the project is not feasible, which is possible. That the base price is $770, I think it's $770,700, which is the same as Panache. I will say in all fairness, I think that price is inappropriate for the site, but it's the one we have established. I think we need to go through a process to figure out what it ought to be. But it spells out the terms under which HEDRA could consider reducing the base price, and that would include encumbrances on the site. It's needed to make the project financially feasible, or it's that you simply decide that it's necessary for an incentive because you want the project on the property. Our obligations would include preparing a survey, providing regulatory information to the developers team so that they can evaluate the site, to do the cleanup that we've already committed to do, and to certify the conditions after cleanup, figure out how to park the site, which will certainly be a challenge, look for interim office space that Spades might need during its startup, figure out how to mitigate the barriers to the project, and then in the same light of working with Panache, trying to find ways that we can help financial assistance for the project. And we would investigate what it would mean for Hastings to become a green city and expand our partnership with Spades through this project. Spades' obligations would be to retain qualified assistance to plan for a building on the site, to look for ways to improve the site for development, and then to provide the sort of information that we have asked for before: a cost estimate for the project, sources and uses, we will work with them to figure out ways to mitigate the project. They'll provide a timeline for construction and the phasing of additional jobs, and submit a plan for our internal site review and approval process. So that's the gist of the development agreement, and I would be happy to answer any questions about that proposal.
If we can exit the screen share, I can see everybody. Oh, there we go. Okay, by a show of hands, are there questions, please? Mr. Gobler?
I just had a question when they bring up 200 jobs, and I have to get my mind around how big of a building they would need on that site. And is it feasible to build a building that could house that?
That's certainly a fair question, and they're trying to figure that out as well, because I think it's the process that lots are going through to try and redefine what is office space in the new normal that's going to exist. They in my initial discussions with them, 200 person space simply was not adequate for what they were anticipating at their headquarters building. That number is greatly in flux as they try to figure out who works at home, who works at other locations, and what do they really need there. So part of this year period of evaluation is to determine what can you put on the site and is that adequate?
Is there a follow-up to that? Anyone? Okay. Additional?
Yeah, just in the process of that 200 jobs, is that national 200 jobs, or do they have more than that nationally? And they were saying 200 specific to Hastings, or is it?
That's an excellent question. It would be 200 specific to this site. They'll have offices and employees across the globe, as I understand it. And this will be their headquarters, but certainly not their only facility.
Yeah.
Mr. Sinclair?
More of a general question, just conceptually, as we look at the two proposals and then kind of contrast these with the Panache proposal. To me, what it appears is that staff has taken a position of facilitating a process, much more so in the context of contributing. Rusty, you can even go back. Well, we don't need to bring up the presentation, but there were a number of items that were previously, as far as I remember, put upon the developer to bring to the table, such as the ALTA survey, certain site feasibility factors, pro formas, et cetera, that were ultimately deemed insufficient in order for us to even be able to move forward with any kind of a concept of the Panache cidery project. In this case, we've now added a list, all those to the list of things that HEDRA will and city staff will contribute to the process. And I'm curious what changed in terms of, I guess, the strategy of basically doing a lot more hand-holding with spades than we were ever willing to do or even conceptualize with Panache. If I'm characterizing that, accurately, that's what I'm seeing, and I'm just curious why that shift.
Sure, I'm happy to address that. First of all, I think that the information that we're requesting from Spades is very similar to what we requested from Panache. I remember the words from Commissioner Vaughn about making sure that we were going to hold other proposers that other potential users of that site accountable to the same standards we were holding Panache. And if you look at the sources and uses, the operating projections, those are the same things that were required of Panache. We had discussed internally doing the ALTA survey at the conclusion of our agreement with Panache prior to Spades coming forward and wanting to enter into a preliminary development agreement, because we knew we needed to do that eventually to develop the property. Has there been more handholding? Absolutely. In my 41 years of working with local governments, I can tell you in all honesty, this is one of the more intriguing economic development opportunities that I've had the opportunity to work with. And we can all look at it and say, yep, there's blue sky there. And it is still conceptual. But I think if you step back and look at it, the upside of what Spades has proposed is significant, and it is one that's being brought to Hastings without a competitive process, which is very unusual, and one that other cities will, I think, pull out all the stops to go after should we decide that we don't want to accommodate that. So has there been additional handholding? Absolutely.
Okay, that helps. Thanks, Rusty.
Rusty, in terms of economic development, and if you had to give us a couple just bullet points of how this would impact it in a better way than the Mint proposal, and I think we kind of have a basic idea of why, but when you the viability of it, and of course we're all concerned that something is going to be started and then it's not viable and we're back to square one again. So absolutely,
and those are all viable concerns. I have no doubt that Mint Development will build a wonderful housing project there, and it's an appropriate place for a housing project. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Minus other considerations, that'd be a great project. But at the same time, you're talking about a business that not only will bring employees to the community, and we are about trying to attract new jobs to the community, and I think they would be good paying jobs. They would be in a location that helps support the downtown business community by creating a market that simply does not exist today, a daytime market. I think there's really strong synergy with the confluence, with the meeting facilities and the lodging. If you subscribe to Spade's vision for what it's going to be, it's going to attract people from around the country, from around the globe to come to their the headquarters to collaborate with them. And they're certainly going to have to stay somewhere, and they will obviously host meetings in conjunction with their operations. So it really is apples and oranges, and it does require, you have a project with Mint that is certainly a bird in the hand, and I have no reason to believe that Mint Development would not build what it is that it's talking about, and it would be a fine project on that location. Is there every reason to be cautious about whether or not Spades is going to develop? Certainly, but I think trying to weigh the risk and reward, there is not. I will stay with the words in the proposal. I think there is a little risk. That's a desirable piece of property for housing development. It will continue to be a desirable piece of property for housing development, but you will not find another proposal like Spades with the potential benefit not only that it brings, but the potential of other businesses wanting to be around Spades to locate in Hastings for some considerable period of time. It is not a slam dunk, but I think you have to step back and look and say, is the risk of not having something develop on block one for the next year, perhaps even the next year, if Spades goes away, worth taking the risk of the upside that it offers? And that's part of the equation.
Thank you. Mr. Balsanic, had a question?
Yes, thank you. Well, not so much a question, but I'm going to make a comment here, try and keep it as concise as I can. ever since I've been on the city council, I keep saying what we need is a big developer to come into Hastings so that we get the attention of the rest of the business community. This is big time. I really concur with what Rusty is saying on all of this. And I've got some mixed feelings about this because it is so brand new. It's not a company that's already established. This is something that they're putting together as they're talking to us. And I just want to give them a lot of faith in terms of that. The housing from Mint, we could probably find an alternative location, probably not on the river, but with appropriate amenities, I would think that what Mint wants to do could be built and seen through to fruition in another location in the city. I really hate to give up, on Spades. You've got a Hastings born and raised resident, high school graduate of Hastings High School, community ties. He's really wanting to make this as good as possible. And to me, it's very exciting. It's just very, very exciting. We're losing, we've got Smead out there. They were a big company for years and they're in decline. How much longer they're going to exist, I don't know. As emails and laptops continue to flourish in the business community and in education, for that matter. I'm not too worried about the aspect of working remotely because at some point, I mean, if this is going to be their worldwide headquarters, I would think that they're going to want to have the appropriate staff there for conferences, for meeting prospective clients, for fundraising, and what have you. There are certain limitations of Zoom that can't be overcome. They just can't. So I put a lot of faith in, what they're offering and saying, we're going to make this the corporate headquarters, 200 employees. The only thing that made me a little nervous is I said, what is going to be your wages, for corporate headquarters? And instead of answering specifically on that, he went into a long dissertation on $15 an hour wages for employees. I'm not sure if he didn't understand my question or what, but I understand that there's going to be, some people out there holding shovels and doing minimum wage types of things. They're not going to be in Hastings, from what I gather. They'll be out and about to not only different countries, but different continents. And again, if it is going to be a corporate headquarter, then, like 3M with its corporate headquarters, you've got the people that need to be in the building there. They're not working remotely. I think we can get both projects completed here in Hastings. It's a matter of finding an alternative site. for one or the other. It is a lucrative site in terms of what is there. I myself, I think it does have some limitations. Every time a railroad train comes through, I mean, we live up here on 340 Crestview, and we can still hear the trains and the horns honking and the rumbling and so forth. And we're way up here on top of the hill, just about 2 blocks away from the high school. I don't know, they can probably surmount that with the right kind of building construction. But it is amazing that the property has sat there for so long with no interest, and suddenly in the last year and a half, we've got 3 parties that would like to do something there. Last thing to say is I'm all about jobs. If we can create 200 jobs in Hastings, and with that kind of spinoff for groceries, for dining, for recreation, for all kinds of other contributions for the community, I'm all for that. I would love to have all 200 living in Hastings. That probably may not occur, but the status that it would bring Hastings, I think, is tremendous. And so, underscoring what Rusty has said, and add to that my enthusiasm and the idea that we could find someplace else for Mint. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Balsanic. So with that and this discussion tonight, is anyone prepared to put forth a motion to have an exclusive agreement, consider entering an exclusive agreement with either of these? Mr. Sinclair.
Would you mind if I just share a couple thoughts before we would entertain a motion? I guess mainly because, frankly, I think I have an opinion in sharp contrast with some of what's been shared tonight. Fundamentally, I think it's an exciting proposal. The space proposal is an exciting proposal. To me, it looks obvious that the magnitude of a footprint far exceeds the size and constraints of that site. We've struggled for decades to find someone even remotely interested in that site. And I think it's fortuitous now that we do have some interest, but we've only got one party who's actually done any reasonable amount of due diligence to determine that they actually have a viable project on that site. No one else has ever come with even close to the amount of work that Mint Development's done to actually come with the confidence that they can produce a project on that site. So to me, there's some trepidation around the nature of a blue sky proposal like this, as exciting as it might be in concept. And I'll share a couple. This is purely anecdotal, which is going to bias my opinion, I will admit. But as a business owner, it's grown a business from 2 guys in a truck to 22 people, from 2 guys in a truck to a revenue in the mid millions. I have a mindset of that is a slow grow. And as a nationally based firm ourselves, serving a broad geographic area, there is very little motivation to concentrate all your people in one location. It doesn't make sense. We have a home-based business. Everybody our people work remotely from their home offices because we need people all over the country at any given time. Now, that's very specific to my business, I recognize, but I think it's partially that happened to be what the world is now discovering, is that you can grow a large business around remote operating individuals that serves a large geographic area that doesn't require concentration of people in one physical location. And ultimately, that leads me to question, okay, if you've got a business that goes from currently 1 to 200, one, how long will that take, and what will be the concentration of those people in any kind of meaningful way in Hastings? To me, from my experience, it doesn't seem likely that you would have a high percentage of those people located here. Now, I'm making all kinds of assumptions and projections. I fully admit that. But those are my concerns around that model and what that number represents. Now, in contrast, Joe, you said it, jobs are really important. And I agree. And what I see is that housing now represents jobs. When you create housing, by nature of how we're all working now, you create jobs. Those are offices. Those are now Rob's projections. I think, if I remember right, started from 20 to 35. So in my mind, that represents 20 to 35 jobs inherent in those locations. Now, if you want to break that down into percentage and say, well, maybe 50 would commuters and 50% would be work from home, I don't know. You could play with those numbers. But it seems like a meaningful amount of jobs would be created by nature of creating an environment where people want to live and work at the same time. And with the amenities he's talking about, that's exactly what he's catering to with that concept. So to me, I get as excited about the Mint development because it hits our strategic plan of housing. It represents jobs. If we were all in agreement that a house represents an office, which effectively represents a job now, and it fits the site. So I would take the same mentality and say, to me, that looks like a better fit for that site, both in magnitude and timeliness, because we need this stuff now. We don't need it in 5 years, or who knows what we're going to need in 5 years. But there's a time cost to waiting 5 years to let something spin, which we've all watched a project take 1, then 2, then 5, then 7, and it's still open-ended. And it was exciting. It's still exciting, and we're all excited for that to get to the end. But it's a long, slow climb. So, and I guess I'd summarize by saying the timeliness of that project, the due diligence already done, the likelihood of success, and the fact that we have a large project that I think is going to require probably a bigger site, which happens to be adjacent to us. I mean, if we want to look for properties that are developable at a larger scale, they're right there on the riverfront. Granted, not owned by HEDRA, but they exist. And HEDRA has other land for larger properties as well. So I'm of the opinion that I'm not making a motion that we accept one or the other. I like what Mr. Barr said, to the effect of, so much of this hinges on that ALTA survey in terms of an establishment of feasibility of either project. I don't see a compelling reason to get into an exclusive agreement with either of them when we can take that critical information and potentially determine feasibility or unfeasibility of one or both without landing ourselves in a 2-year binding agreement that none of us want to get into and ultimately watch fizzle out at the end. I mean, we've been through it. It's depressing. So to me, we've got a great option to move both of them forward in terms of establishing feasibility without blocking one out and putting anybody on their heels. And I think if I were to make a motion, that's probably where I'd head.
And Mr. Sinclair, I think I'm right on board with what you're saying, and I don't know that any of us is chomping at the bit to enter an exclusive agreement at this time. I would ask Mr. Fifield and Mr. Hinsman if there's, in terms of a cost benefit analysis, to get more information on this for us, perhaps into our next meeting. What's our risk of loss here if we get some further information and move this to a future decision? Either of you.
Sure, Madam President. At this point, deferring any decision tonight, if that's the direction of the board, staff is certainly fine with that. if there's any deferral, we'd ask for, if there's any specific information that you're looking for that we can help and aid in making a decision, that you provide some direction to us on that. As we look at the proposals, we've got two very different proposals coming forward from us. And I think we all recognize that there's a confidence in a good track record that we've seen with Rob Bars, with what he's done. There's a tremendous amount of excitement of what might happen with Spades as well. So we understand that this is a tough decision for the board, and potentially more information is necessary in order to make that decision.
So what I would request at this point is for the commissioners to please, unless there's a motion, and I'll get to that in a moment, but if we do not have a motion put forth before the board tonight with regard to exclusivity in this contract, could we gather up some potential questions and documents or studies that we would want and submit them to Mr. Hinsman by Monday? Is that reasonable to everyone? Just if you can indicate, it's not a vote. Is there anyone who needs more time than that? I'll just put forward.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Martha?
Yes.
Isn't the Alta survey really the most beneficial next step in terms of?
And that should be included, Scott. Yes, absolutely. And that would be from your, Mr. Hinsman, if you could write that down tonight. I think we're all in agreement with that. I don't hear any reasons otherwise, but just to ferret out additional information that we're all having concerns about that are not clear. I don't think anyone's chomping at the bit to have this exclusive yet. And both ideas are great for their own reasons. I'm just concerned that are we going to lose something if there's a time period to wait a little bit? And I personally don't see any. And so if there is something that we're going to have, we're going to lose one of these folks bidding on this, then I would like to move forward with something. But I'm not seeing that as a reason to have to have exclusivity today. Mr. Balsanic.
Thank you. John, you said you had taken Spades on a tour of potential developmental properties. Is that correct?
No, actually, Rusty has had that contact with him, so I think I'll turn to him on any questions related to that.
Okay, I'm sorry, Rusty, same question.
I had Mr. Menard and his CFO in a meeting like this, and we looked at alternative sites virtually, both downtown and then in the northern part of the industrial park.
Did he indicate, I know that this is his A plan, did he indicate a B?
No, he didn't, and I don't know that there isn't one. I would agree with Mr. Sinclair that ultimately the Block 2 site is a stronger site for this, and that may yet emerge as these conversations continue. But no, they didn't. They did express a strong preference for being in the downtown on the riverfront in a national park.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not in favor of accepting one or the other yet tonight. I need to see more things from Spades, excuse me, plural, in terms of some hard figures on employment. There were a lot of numbers thrown out. 7-figure numbers and so forth. I guess I'd like to see exactly what they've got in terms of financing that is lined up for what they want to do. I want to see also contracts that they have with other countries or, whoever, countries, municipalities, states, whatever, so I can see that this is something that is growing, that it is actually doing its thing. Can we do that?
I believe that is possible. I did get some clarification from Spades on the kind of the local development timetable. They would envision starting construction to have the building completed, so to be construction 21 or 22, depending on when, so to be done by the end of 22. So they would start employment in 23, with initially with 50 to 100 employees, and they would envision it growing to the 200 by no later than 2028.
Okay.
Based on what they know today.
Yeah. I appreciate what Scott is saying too, in terms of people, working from home. What percentage of, how many units in that apartment complex for Mint?
I think that was 20 to 40, Commissioner.
Okay. And that, Scott, you're saying the anticipation is 30 to 35?
No, Joe, I'm just saying that what he would have to test his density based on the ultimate Alta survey. So I think he gave us that range of 20 to 40. I'm just conceptually saying that based on my experience, whatever the number of units are is an effective number of additional jobs in that downtown. When we talk about residual benefit and the possibility of adding to your downtown and restaurant business environment, use of local downtown businesses, synergies with Confluence, and to me, I see them actually existing in that proposal, which was what I was trying to convey. I don't know what the ultimate numbers will be. I guess we'll know after we get an Alta survey, because that's what everybody needs in order to figure out what they can build there.
Right. And we'll know also when we get a vaccine, in terms of, what people are going to keep on doing, or how people are going to think about going back to what they used to do. It just, everything is very fluid right now. I don't want to use the pandemic as an excuse to rule out one or the other. If anything, the pandemic, as as a lot of people have been saying, is waking us up in terms of how we have been doing things versus how we could be doing things. Even apartments may and houses may become different in terms of the architecture and engineering for all of that. But bottom line, again, I'm kind of reluctant to get into exclusivity with one or the other right now. I think they're both really good. I don't want to turn away either one. I'd like to try and convince one or the other to look into alternate locations. The one that would probably be easiest in terms of finding alternative locations would be Mint. That housing is going to fill up really no matter where you put it. Unless, has anybody mentioned anything in terms of, are these going to be market rate apartments or upper tier apartments or affordable housing?
No, I believe he mentioned that it was going to be market.
Okay, market rate. I'm sorry. I apologize.
I think what Mr. Bars had mentioned is that the apartments would be towards the upper end of the market. He saw some market averages and was looking to go a few $100s above that.
Yeah, and being on the river would certainly add to it if you can get by with the vibrations from the trains.
Mr. Piney, I know you've been quiet all night tonight. If I can interrupt Mr. Blasenik, if you
I'm
can
done.
comment
Yeah.
for Mr. Piney, please. Thank you. We're having some difficulty hearing you, Mr. Piney, at least I am. Would you be able to enter the chat and just leave a comment there? I think we can record it or I'll see it. Do you see that option on the bottom of your screen? Because your voice is not coming through. It might be the connection.
Okay.
Maybe Mr. Hinsman, you can report, if you're the only one who can see the chat, maybe you can
Okay.
saying, or if
Yeah,
I can.
yeah, I'll look to
Okay.
see what Dennis puts in here. If that doesn't
Okay.
work, if he wants to send me email or text or whatever
Okay.
works, I'll take it from there.
Okay, is anyone, at this point, is anyone prepared for exclusivity? If you can just indicate. Well, that being said, I think maybe we should, I would propose that we have a special meeting about this if needed, or otherwise it gets punted to the next meeting. That's tabled till that, until we have some questions answered. And I understand the impact that moving forward with this quickly would have, but given the amount of money we're talking about here and the nature of what we put on a very important piece of land, it's worth taking some additional time. So hearing that we're not going to move forward, I think that's the only route. And Mr. Hinsman, if you want to call a special meeting, I think that would be appropriate.
Okay, and President and Commissioners, what I'm looking at here is there was some discussion over what sort of information you may want or questions you might want answered prior to any future discussion here. And I know one thing that's come up here is the Alta survey, and I agree with that. And we've taken measures to conduct that already. And so I have an estimate waiting for us so that I'll be likely pulling the trigger on shortly to get that thing done. And so we'll have that'll be off the checklist. But, and I know Commissioner Balsanic had shared some information related to financing contracts. I think a lot of it's, if I may paraphrase, is coming towards viability of the project on space. Essentially, what is their time frame for development? What milestones might they hit? How long that would take. So we have some reasonable expectations from that. I think that seems to be some of the questions were related to that aspect of it. So, you know, if that's consistent with some of the concerns of HEDRA, those are questions that we can attempt to address. But if there's other things or other subjects that you feel would need further information, I'd ask that you'd help us provide that, and we'll do our best to get the answers.
Okay, and what I'd like to do is set a deadline on that for Monday at 4 p.m., please, to email Mr. Hinsman, commissioners. The other thing that I think we'd like to look at, what I'm hearing from all of you, is that whether either party is interested in an alternate option at this point, would they still be interested in working with us? And just a brief yes or no would help.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Mr. Vaughn, last comment, please.
I'm all in favor, but I think I like the Alta thing, but why are we focused? Right now we're focused on two. We just had somebody that had a proposal in front of us that Panache, we just need to let people know that we don't want any more exclusive deals. It locks us up too much. I don't want Panache out of the picture. They should be saying, hey, wait a second, it's a hoard. We talked about this before. We got now some people have an interest in this piece of property, and Scott has used great words. It's all about synergy. We did a lot of investment downtown. We got art space. People want to buy this. So I say, let's back off these exclusivities and let these people come at us and say, this is what I'm going to do there. And not what you need to do for me. This is what we're going to bring to the community. We got an opportunity here. So I don't want Panache out of the picture. I think that's a great investment for our community too. Thank you.
Agreed. I think what was commented before, Mr. Vaughn and Mr. Fifield, you can follow up, is simply that there might be a risk of losing something that we would otherwise miss out on, that would hurt us eventually economically, socially, otherwise. Mr. Fifield?
Since I won't be part of the discussion going forward, a little bit of a parting comment. I think you were very fortunate to have two good proposals. Could there be others out there? There certainly could be. I would tell you that in my judgment, and having dealt with spades for the last year, Hastings is very fortunate to be in the position that it's in without any competition from anybody else. And I think the minute you let that slide away, I think the opportunity slides with it. I think it becomes very difficult to compete regionally or nationally for this facility. And I just think you should keep that in mind as this drags on, and you don't consider allowing whoever it is to have control of the site so they can finish their due diligence. No disrespect to Panache. I just think it's the reality of the situation that as this strays away from the preliminary development agreement, you increase the risk that other places come into competition for this facility, and I think that's not in Hastings' best interest.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have resolved this, that we're not taking a vote on that tonight, that we are moving forward with some additional information requests. Okay, so it is now 7:42. We have spent a good amount of time on our first topic of the evening. Keeping that in mind in everybody's, potential time restraints and personal lives, let's move through the agenda as efficiently as we can, knowing that everyone has read their documents ahead of time and has them in front of you, hopefully, and have your questions prepared, please. So the strategic plan that was proposed as part of your packet, we'll be moving on to that next with the proposal that we approve it and adopt it. Mr. Fifield, I believe this is for you.
In keeping with that suggestion, the PowerPoint I had was the same PowerPoint that I used at the last meeting. So under the assumption that people watched that PowerPoint presentation, and I've gotten any feedback from it, the plan is consistent with what we discussed at the last couple of meetings, and I will defer my PowerPoint presentation and answer any questions you have about the plan.
Just comment that it's a beautiful presentation as far as what's been produced before and the way it's been printed out. I think the strategic initiatives encompass a lot of what was developed at our very first meeting about this. And hopefully we have, with these proposals, some that we've heard about tonight, additional implementation of them. So if with that, I will go on to any questions from the commissioners, please, or comments. Is there a motion to adopt the strategic plan?
Yes.
I'm sorry, who was that? Was that Mr. Goldberg? Could you raise your hand if there is a motion, please? I didn't.
I think that was Mr. Sweeney.
Mr. Payne?
Yes.
Is there a second? Ms. Fox, thank you. All those in favor of adopting the strategic plan, we'll all go through by roll call. Mr. Goblersch?
Aye.
Ms. Fox?
Aye.
Mr. Balsanic?
Aye.
Mr. Sinclair?
Aye.
Mr. Vaughn?
Aye.
Mr. Piney?
Aye.
And I will also vote yes to adopt it. Thank you all very much. Next on our business agenda, we have the budget. I believe, Mr. Hinsman, you have that detail.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm going to share my screen here to give you a snapshot of what we're looking at for the budget for next year. Go. You already know we're here, so let's go to the next slide. If I could figure out how to. What's going on here? Whoops. Why? On the wrong screen. There we are. HEDRA budget for next year. With the present situation at hand, we're not looking at any increases over the budget. A lot of the priorities that we've established are similar to what we had in 2020. We're taking these from the strategic plan that we've been working on and updating. Because of COVID and some of the reallocation of resources, we're looking at extending a lot of the things from 2020 into 21. So things that we've targeted, housing being one of those. We've done some work this year on housing. We're going to continue to do some more next year, putting some funds towards that. On the Vermilion Street corridor, we had allocations this year that were delayed. We're continuing those requests for next year, keeping in mind that as we go into 21 and 22, there is a major reconstruction project that is looking for action in 24, 25, in which a development plan is going to be done by MnDOT. So a timely item there. With UBC redevelopment, we have $20,000 allocated towards trying to figure out how we reuse the space internally as the city. Right now, we are using the space for storage of miscellaneous items. That certainly was not the intent of purchasing the property some 15 years ago. But we need to figure out a way to move that stuff out of there so we can have a development site. Rusty has been working very diligently this year on putting together a downtown property use study. The development of this property is consistent with that. So we're putting money towards trying to figure out how to get the stuff out of there so we can develop the property. The next one's interesting on site acquisition. One of the desires we've had as staff for quite a long time is to be able to have more capital available for acquisition, for development. When we take a look at the Vermilion Street plan, for example, there's key intersections that we've established. We're looking at the private market to really take the lead on some of these items, but there may be random parcels or assistance, things that we could do that could prime the pump to make a development happen. And so what we're looking at is the $180,000 that we have spent so far on our HEART grant program is potentially reimbursable through a 1.7 million allocation we're getting from the feds. So we may be getting that money back. And if we do, we want to be able to my proposal is to allocate those funds towards site acquisition in the future. Now, this $1.7 million, which is something called the CARES Act, is an item that was talked about by the city council at the last meeting, something that they're going to be discussing more coming up in the future. And it encompasses a wide variety of things, economic development being one of them. But that's one thing we're looking at for next year. Some of the other things are pretty standard. We've got the commercial and residential rehab programs, which are similar that we've had in the last few years in similar amounts. Putting money towards downtown environmental cleanup. This is really towards the site we've been talking about today. We do have a grant on hand for that one, but there may be other ancillary costs related to it, so be able to provide money for that. We're looking at hiring an intern for next year too, half planning, half community development, and then having some money for marketing. So that's kind of the highlights of what we're proposing to bring forward for our budget in 2021. We've looked at developing this from our past precedent and from our strategic plans. So I can stand for any questions that the commission may have. There's no action on this tonight, just more discussion.
Any questions for Mr. Hinson based on what he's just described? It's very similar to what we had last year, as he stated. Any questions or discussion about?
Is my mic working?
Oh, now you're back.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Just in time. The money for acquisition is critical. We have a major commercial street through the heart of our community that has been win or development. We see how well that's going. I think Ms. Vaughn made a comment earlier that we need to be a little more in control of what we want to see happening in our community on these critical sites. This money will allow us to identify these intersection sites that I mentioned, set the tone for the development ourselves, instead of waiting. Other communities, I think, have done amazing jobs with this, and I'm really, really happy to hear they have the funding now to really materially push at it ourselves. Congratulations, John. Thank you.
Okay, I think I caught most of what you said. Hopefully you guys got that. That site acquisition is very critical. It broke up just a tiny bit at the end, but I thank you so much for your input, Mr. Piney. We can't hear you anymore if you are speaking, but hopefully you can reconnect. If you have an we can leave that till our closing comments. And anything else with regard to that subject on the budget? Perfect. There's no action required tonight on that. And then next up is the authorization of loan subordination for Spiral Brewery.
Yes, Madam President here. I'll go through briefly what we're looking at for action for Spiral Brewery. I'm going to share my screen here, which is similar to your packet. And here we go. So what we're looking to do is to what's called subordinate our position in a loan. Background information, we have issued 3 loans for Spiral Brewery downtown, 2 of them in 2017 at the same time, which was for real estate improvements and working capital, and then 1 in 2018 for real estate improvements. So the total position we had for the loan amount was about $61,400. The outstanding amount today is just over $41,000. What the subordination of a loan entails is the position in collection. Typically, the loans that we give are going to be subordinate or secondary to a primary loan, which is the major loan for acquisition of the property or the major loan for the improvements of a property. So what's being asked tonight is not an unusual situation for us. We've done many times in the past. So what we're being able to do is to say if there's some sort of issue that comes forward with the property, if the loan was to go into default, we would take a position of collection behind somebody who would be primary. In this case, so they're SBA loans. And so what we've listed below here is what the proposal would be. There's a loan here for acquisition of the building itself. And we'll go back a little bit. What's being asked here by Spiral is Spiral presently is leasing their building. They are looking to purchase the building outright, which is great. And in order to do this, needs this loan. So the loan is being broken up by a couple of different banks at 225 and 187. Those would be the primary position loans, and then ours would come as a secondary position at $41,000. The interesting part to look at is this. Your total debt right now is $453,000. The appraised value of the property is $535,000. So if everything was to go belly up on this property, heaven forbid, that we're in a good position to collect in this. So it looks like our risk involved in this is quite minimal on this. So the action that we're asking for you tonight is this, and it gets to be a little complicated. With the positions that we had on the original loans, we did those as loans, but since we were not dealing with the property owner at that time, we were dealing with individual owners. These individual owners pledged guarantees. And so we're going to be releasing those original investor guarantees on this and put the obligation onto this new entity called Helix, who is the purchaser of the building itself. So the effect of this is similar to any other subordination. The difference that we're having here is that we're changing the individuals that were involved in the guarantee into a single entity on this. So we're asking for you to release MCG Investments from its 3 guarantees, release the 3 MCG investment mortgages, and accept the 3 new Helix mortgages, which would be for the same amount, which would be subordinate to the primary financing, and then authorize me to sign those agreements so that they can close on the property. So I should identify that Spiral Brewery itself, one of the entities and ownership of that is one of our HEDRA commissioners, Jen Fox. So that's to bring that for your information. And I can stand for any questions.
Mr. Sinclair?
The appraised value, is that, what's the date of that appraised value, John? Is that a recent one? Is that dated? What is that?
You know, Commissioner, I don't have that in front of me. I believe that's fairly recent.
I think we could probably allow Ms. Fox to answer that.
About a month ago.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Mhm.
Mr. Goldberg.
John, typically when you're doing a purchase of a building, the personal guarantees have to be signed for the people that are buying that building. Do we not take personal guarantees for our loans? Because they're going to have to do it for the first and second. The ownership would have to do it on the first and second.
It's a very good question, Commissioner. I know there's been a lot of documents that have been going furiously back and forth the last day or two on this one, and I'm trying to recall whether we had an aspect of there that still required the personal guarantees in that. I don't have that answer for you.
I just think it should be consistent with what the first and second mortgage is, that we should be in the same kind of position as they are, so.
Okay. Yeah, Commissioner, I will look into that one.
Additional questions? Mr. Sinclair.
So as the mortgage holder, is that Spiral Brewery, which includes all assets of that building? Or is it really, does it constitute a mortgage of the shell with a separate entity owning the assets within the facility? What all is included in that appraisal, I guess, is my question. Is it an appraisal of just the building as a piece of real estate, or does it include any aspect of assets within the facility as well? Like, Jen, like you've got some significant hard assets in that building that are effectively tied to the building. Does that make them part of the building and therefore recoverable asset, or are they separate? Are they capitalized separate from the building?
John, perhaps you know differently, but the appraisal did change from the first appraisal where we didn't have our equipment in there, significantly changed to this appraisal. So my belief is that our reconstruction and our equipment is included.
Okay.
That's
John,
my understanding. Yeah, that's my understanding as well, is that the asset, it's not a shell, but it's also the assets within the building itself.
Okay. So fundamentally, and this is the plan, the worst case, any liquidation would be a liquidation of some of those rather unique hard assets as well. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to authorize a loan subordination before us this evening?
I'll make that motion.
Mr. Sinclair, is there a second?
I will.
Thank you, Mr. Piney. All those in favor will go forth. Mr. Goldblush?
Aye.
Ms. Fox, I believe you're abstaining from this.
I'll abstain, yeah.
Mr. Balsanic?
Yes.
Mr. Sinclair?
Yes.
Mr. Vaughn?
Yes.
Mr. Piney?
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well. Unanimous. Thank you very much. And that is all we have for business tonight. And then we have the reports and information. Mr. Hinsman, are you in all of these this evening? If you would just give us those in order, that would be fantastic.
Thank you, Madam President. I will be very, very brief on these unless there's any questions. Housing study was included within your packet. So if you have any questions, we could discuss those tonight, but this was planned to be more of an informational item on that. Commercial vacancy downtown in other places, pretty much unchanged. Under the development update side, a couple of things occurring. One that's not in your packet, which is interesting, the former Westview Packaging Building, which is on the southwest corner of Spiral Boulevard and Enterprise Avenue in the industrial park, been vacant and underused for quite some time. Was purchased a few weeks ago by a company called Royal Pet out of South St. Paul, and they're moving their operations into it. So it's about a 70,000 square foot building altogether. Royal Pet's operations in South St. Paul, I think they employ about 20 people there. So I believe the intent is to bring all of that in here shortly. They're going through some building improvements at present. What they do is they manufacture some pet food and they have pet products that they sell. So That'd be a nice addition to the industrial park, and there's some potential expansion that may be involved with that in the future as well. So good news there. We have Shalamka Services has purchased a building, the O'Connor Plumbing Building on Vermilion Street. This is a building that's been vacant for a long time. They're putting some substantial money into it through some demolitions and a substantial rehabilitation of the building itself. So we're looking forward to that going forward. On our economic development coordinator search, we have applications due this Sunday, the 12th. We've had a pretty good response so far. We have a couple of candidates I'm really looking forward to talking to. So hopefully even more come in over the weekend. And I think at the beginning of the meeting, we shared that Rusty Fifield, our economic development coordinator, will be leaving us tomorrow, retiring from a full and successful life in consulting and government. So we wish him all the best. And that's all that I had.
I'll just reiterate, Rusty, you've done a phenomenal job. I think we're all going to be very sad that you're leaving us. And I wish we could do something for you in person, which we still can, I guess. If you want to, I can host it at my office and we can have a little get together when you're ready. And with that, are there any other comments for the good of the order this evening?
Well, it's been a great way to end the career. I can't think of any place better to have done it than here, and I just wish I was staying longer. But I'm excited to go wander the countryside for a while.
And please share your photos with us. I'm excited for you as well.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'll have entertain a motion to adjourn this evening.
I'll move.
Mr. Gobersh, thank you. A second. And Mr. Vaughn, thank you. With that, we are